Welcome to Okoboji Broadcast, everybody. I'm Jeff Thies. I'm glad to have you join us here today. We are in the wonderful Maritime Museum here in Arnold's Park, right adjacent to Arnold's Park Amusement Park. My guest is author Jonathan Reed, and this is his latest book, Lost Resorts of the Iowa Great Lakes. And Jonathan, first of all, welcome. Thanks for taking some time with me, man.
No problem at all. Glad to be here.
It's and I just, before we started, I told you that I'm kind of a history buff, and I love history, and this is why I think what you do is so important, because over the years, you talk to people that have lived their entire lives in the Iowa Great Lakes, and even when they talk about every square foot has history. And when talking to someone, they'd be pointing at a building, back in the 40s, that was a five and dime and a pharmacy, and they had the best soda fountain and so forth. And it's just, and when those people, if things are not documented, like you have done in your two books,
it goes away.
It goes away, those stories and the folklore, and that's why I think what you do is just, first of all, it's fun. It's got to be fun for you.
It is. I like trying to discover things that have been, if not forgotten, at least set aside for so long that it appears as new.
Yes.
And that's always exciting when you can find something that, oh, I didn't know that, especially when an old timer says that.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, and like I say, it's just fun. But let's talk about this book, The Lost Resorts of the Iowa Great Lakes. And first of all, after your initial book of Okoboji and the Iowa Great Lakes, what led you to do this one and start doing research, Jonathan?
It was the demise of the Inn Hotel that actually started it. When we saw that it was going to be sold, and unlike, for instance, the amusement park, when there was a huge public outcry, response was muted. Nobody seemed to really want to jump in and save the inn, and it appeared it was going to go away. And then when actual demolition began, that was tough for a lot of people to watch that, even though it was the new inn.
Which happened, it became the new inn in the 50s? Was it?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
Or in the early 60s, I guess it was.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And, and I think sometimes you don't know what you got until it's going away. And for locals, maybe initially when that news came, we weren't the ones, unless we had moved here from somewhere else, that stayed at the inn, that had time in the pool, had time on that 3-par golf course, or had an event up in their convention hall and so forth. But then when you see it start to come down,
then it gets real.
Yeah.
Then it gets real for everybody.
Yeah.
And if you look in the book, you'll see I have a few pictures that maybe indicated I was on unauthorized property during the time. But I did discover some really cool stuff and able to grab some photographs of the last moments, if you will, the last days of the inn before it was totally gone.
One I saw in particular in your book, Jonathan, was kind of what I think you referred to as a ghostly image where the sign
of the double arch of the awning with the inn, just the outline of the words THEINN on it. Yeah, all gone.
Even today, as I boat past there, and I know it had dilapidated over the years, different ownership and so forth, but still when I boat by there, and I miss seeing that beautiful white on the green. Yeah.
But consider this, that back in the early 40s, when it was literally the original building built in 1896, 1998 was still there.
Yeah.
I'm sure people said the same thing that you just did. Oh, I'm going to miss that when it's gone, because the original inn was many hundreds of feet long.
Yes.
And 2.5 stories high, and quite impressive structure.
Yeah, and of course the history of it, and years, I think when they turned 125, the Evans family, I had an opportunity to interview them, and when they talked about, the dances they would have, and all every night seems like there was music, and they had special events for it, and it was quite the show place on West Lake Okoboji.
Oh, it was. But it's far from the only show place on West Lake.
Right.
As well. I don't know, our camera view here shows Vacation Village, among other places.
Yes.
And that was purpose-built for family resort activities.
Yeah.
Just after World War II. And you can look at the difference between the huge monolithic structure of like the inn, or to go even farther back, the original Hotel Orleans on the south shore of Spirit Lake,
Yeah.
and what we have adapted to now or enjoy now. We want individual little places. We want our own little space,
Yeah.
because we just tend to recreate a little differently now.
Yeah, and when you talk about that on Spirit Lake, it's fascinating that now when we think of resorts and so forth, we tend to think of in closer to this area. But when the settlers came, and all of a sudden it was, boy, this would be a great spot to have tourists come. I mean, who thought tourists in Okoboji, right? And Big Spirit Lake was the focal point at that point.
Oh, absolutely it was. That's because the railroad came through right at the south end.
Yeah.
And the railroad engineers, not the train operator guys, but the people who have to figure out how to make the rails go places, they looked at that and said, no doubt, hey, this is pretty cool. This is a good place to try to get people to come.
Yeah.
And that was also kind of the business model of many railroads of the day. In addition to building rail lines, they also wanted to give people a place to go, to use those rail lines.
Yeah.
And so in 1882, when the rail came in, the next year, boom, the massive, ornate, opulent, magnificent Hotel Orleans was built. And that was quite the showplace. I can only imagine that what it must have been like. Consider yourself, you might have been on a railroad train in a car for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, just riding across the prairie, maybe an occasional small town, a few buildings, otherwise pretty featureless, just prairie grass and some trees.
Yeah.
And then you come along and come up, if you're coming from the west, look at the town of Spirit Lake, a little bit off in the distance there, and then you come up to the bottom of Big Spirit, and here's this massive structure that was built in the style of the day, meant to impress.
Yes.
And no doubt it did. It was, 3.5 stories tall or 4 stories tall at one end. You drove up there, it was painted probably cream with lime green highlights, and a red brick type of roof. And literally steps away from the train was this grand structure.
Yeah.
And steps away from that was this beautiful flat Spirit Lake.
Yeah.
And you could go up on the top, and I've got a photo in the book that came from a stereo viewer. I think it was taken during the original opening of it, when there were parties and they had speakers from all over the U.S. come, because there are people shown on the roof, and one man with a spyglass looking north toward Minnesota, and the camera is looking this way, and we can almost see to Kansas. I mean, it just is flat and featureless as far as you can see.
Yeah, and isn't it funny, over the generations that have come to Okoboji, do you say Okoboji or Okoboji, first of all?
I slip. I say Okoboji. My grandfather said Okoboji.
Okay, see, after years of talking to Aubrey, I'm careful when I talk to him.
Yes.
I always say Okoboji to him. But anyway, our waters, our beautiful blue lakes, that when those first people were coming and staying at the Orleans Hotel, and at that time, of course, there were no motorboats, but to be out there fishing or to take a bath or whatever it was, the draw of those beautiful lakes was there.
Oh yeah, well, and actually, if you want to call it a resort, Hunter's Lodge on the north shore of Spirit Lake was probably the first commercial enterprise to cater to people who wanted to get out and be hunters and fishermen and trappers and this type of activity, because that was how you recreated and enjoyed nature. And it was probably pretty rugged.
Yeah.
The one picture that I have, as far as we know, it's the only photograph of Hunter's Lodge. It is just a barn board type building with a cedar shake roof, and I'm sure the amenities were slim to none.
Yeah. They probably weren't there for, hey, let's go to Okoboji and have some amenities.
Well, and that was in the 1870s too.
Exactly.
I mean, the railroad hadn't come. You had to come overland by stagecoach or by horse
Yeah.
to get to this remote place.
Yeah. And now today on Big Spirit, there's still a long time lodging place on
Yeah.
Big Spirit as well.
My emotional favorite is Sandbar Beach Resort.
Yeah.
That would actually trace the history to that back to G. Jenkins, who had a fishing business there, where he would rent rowboats out. But through the years, it has continued under various owners to continue to offer what the original mission was. We've got these little cottages. Although at first they were probably just tents or maybe just a literal fishing shack so that you could have some place to go if the rain came or something like that. But today I think they have 14 cottages, and one of the reasons why businesses like this were able to succeed, and I'm not just talking about now, but the historical precedent is there, they buy a whole bunch of land and put the resort in the middle, and then continue to sell off little bits of it to generate cash flow.
Yeah.
And if you were to go up to Sandbar Beach now, technology has overtaken somewhat, and instead of selling a lot of the property off, they now have trailer rental sites. So that people can come, and I'm sure they pay their annual fee and just enjoy the daylights out of it.
Yeah.
As I do when
Sure.
when we go there.
Sure, absolutely. But then time goes on, and we're getting the different steamboats out on West Lake Okoboji. Things start to get built up, and then we start seeing, certainly, over where now Village West is, and so forth, and things started to build up around West Lake.
Well, there are different periods in the lake's history when you'd have great investment and then it would kind of slack, and then great investment and then go slack. Think about some of the great resorts that were around here. You had, of course, Vacation Village. It was after World War II, but let's work backwards a little bit. Manhattan Beach.
Yes.
Manhattan was one of those that started off with a huge amount of land and slowly shrunk down.
They purchased up a lot of West Lake, didn't they?
Wasn't it 1,000 acres, I think?
Yeah, something like that.
To that
Wow.
extent. I think it was a mile of shoreline. Please attach your check to write that today. Please attach the national debt.
Yeah, exactly.
But you had that in the 1890s, and like a lot of businesses, it succeeded and failed. Everybody who started something, eventually it went away. Let's go back to another one, Crescent Beach Resort.
Yes.
Farther down the lake. That's another one that was started by James A. Beck, the man who built the inn. And this was some years later. He'd already sold it to the operators, who continued it for 40 years. But he must have had the development itch.
Yeah.
Because he bought, that's where 1,000 acres comes in. He bought 1,000 acres on that side of the lake, and it was nothing pretty.
Yeah.
It was rocky. There were scrub bushes all over. It was kind of swampy.
Right.
But he had the brilliant idea to bring in some means to dig canals, and that's how the canals over
Which
on the
we
west
see
side.
today, yeah.
And I was fortunate enough to find a photo of him actually out surveying the canals with one of the dredges in the background.
Yeah, and think of the equipment they had to use back then.
Today it was all steam powered back in those days,
Right.
but he had the most modern dredges. They had electric light, so that they could work 24 hours a day if they wanted to.
Wow, that's pretty impressive right there that they could do that.
Yeah, 1912,
Sure.
1910. Yeah.
So yeah, we got some of those names that we still know today, and another part of your book that I really liked, Jonathan, was the mom and pops.
Oh,
Which is part of when you had Gerks in there.
yes.
When I was a kid.
Is that where you used to
That's
go?
where we would go.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you mentioned the trampolines. Because we would literally get up, we had a little camper that we stayed at every weekend in Okoboji, whatever, and you'd have to get up at 4:30 in the morning to be the first in line to get on that trampoline.
Wow.
And all day and night long, there was a line for those trampolines.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things that is the reasons for writing the book, because you had impressions of 8, 9, 10-year-old,
Yeah.
whatever, and those are very central to you. And just like it is with everyone else, it could have been trampolines, it could have been horseback riding if you're there, or it could have been a soda fountain at another place, or a place where you could get ice cream or a cold soda pop. And there's hardly anybody you talk to of a certain age, gray hair.
You got that too?
Yeah, where they talk about, back in the 60s or whatever decade it would have been, this place had the best hamburgers after you were water skiing all day. those are the types of memories that I was hoping that people could kind of reach back as they go through this and resurrect.
You do. You rekindle that when those words are put in front of you and those small memories, it's amazing. And that's what makes this area so special, I think, that when those things are mentioned or you see an image, you hear a song maybe, those images of the Iowa Great Lakes come flooding back and all it does is make you smile.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I hope that can do. My dedication on this book is for all our Okoboji memories.
Yeah.
They really are special to us.
They are. And when you see the generations that continue to come back here, kids that vacationed here, and my own kids. I've got, out of the 3, I've got 2 that live here. One was down in Des Moines, had to come back to Okoboji. And that's very special, and those legacies continue today. As far as the research on this, Jonathan, finding the photos and the stories, how did you go about that?
I knew from the first book that the Maritime Museum has a huge, I'll call it electronic trove of photographs that have been scanned through the years. That was started by Mary Kennedy's late husband, Captain Steve Kennedy.
Yeah.
And while that's a wonderful treasure trove to have, part of the problem is that when Steve passed, the story of the photograph went with him.
Yeah.
The context went with him. And it kind of became, with the first book, one of my missions to try to add context to things that I could.
Yeah.
Pretty much, these books are photographically driven, meaning
Yes.
it's photo caption, photo caption.
Yeah. And that's,
I like that because you can go open a couple pages, read it, and then put it down. You haven't lost anything by putting it down. But the great thing about that is that I tended to rely, and I still rely, on newspaper articles. My background is in journalism, and up until a certain point, when things started getting modern on us, I knew that what was printed in the newspaper, I could take it pretty much as gospel.
right.
And it also helps that, from a writer and a researcher, it also helps that few people are alive today that remember anything directly
Right.
from the 20s, 30s, or 40s.
Yeah.
To disprove this, or argue with me about it.
Right.
Well, here it is written down.
Yep.
You can judge it yourself.
Well, and those generations go by so fast when you think about our greatest generation from the Depression and the Second World War. We lose a lot every day.
Oh,
at this
absolutely,
point,
we do.
so that's what makes this so important. And of course, I know Mary Kennedy here has been so good to you and to all our
She has.
visitors, yes. And Captain Steve was a dear friend of mine, and they had his visitation here. And I always think of, and here, when you said the reference to a picture, as I was standing in this room, and there was a picture over in this wall of the original Queen kind of half submerged in the water, docked, and my initial thought was, I need to ask Steve about it. And you stop, because I can't do that anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this book, Jonathan, available right here at the Maritime Museum.
It is here at the Maritime Museum, Books and Things, the Barn Swallow, Parks Marina, and probably a couple other places that the publisher has yet to tell me about.
They'll let you know eventually.
I hope so.
And like on Amazon, can you?
Oh yeah, also directly from the publisher's website,
Okay.
Arcadia Publishing. Just enter their search for Okoboji or my name, Jonathan Reed, and that page will come up, or from Amazon.com.
Yeah, and now the original, your first book, Okoboji in the Iowa Great Lakes, can we still pick that up somewhere?
It is, yes. It's not out of print, but thanks to the 21st century, all they have to do is press a button and it's back in print. So it's all available at pretty much every place I just mentioned.
What drives, quickly before we go here, Jonathan, what drives, I mean, and your journalism and so forth, what drove you to start finding this history and putting it in book form for people to enjoy?
Perplexed expression. I'm not sure I can answer that. It's just, well, no, actually, I do have an answer for you, Jeff. It's because, can I do it? And I was involved with, almost as a photo editor, with the Parks 125th anniversary book that they produced a few years ago.
Right, yes.
They're gathering items and trying to organize them and make sure there was a good presentation with that. And when the idea for the first book came along, it was like, can I do that? Yeah, I think I can. Won't know until I try.
And you could.
Evidently.
And then you did it again. So is there a book number 3 in the back of Jonathan Reed's head somewhere?
Yeah, there is. I'm working with the Pearson Lakes Art Center to try to capture some of the early days history on that. Very early days in that project as well. And then maybe I'm kind of intrigued by the camps that were all around the lakes. Yeah. Both the religious affiliation, Presbyterian camp, Lutheran camps, but also when people came up here to just camp. Before there were all the mom and pop resorts or even the big resorts.
Right.
My own family, when my great grandfather bought some land on Hayward's Bay, they would come up from Emmitsburg and pitch a tent. Or actually a few tents because they had a cooking tent and everything else. And that would be part of their summer. Yeah. And it wasn't until the 1920s that the cottage was actually built.
See, there's stories right there, Jonathan, that would be lost. So I just want to thank you for your passion for sharing these great stories and more. For those of us that don't do the research, that don't get to talk to people who knew what was going on at one time, it's much appreciated by those of us who love Okoboji.
That's great. Yeah, the way it was is pretty special.
Yeah, it is, and we try to keep that legacy going now. The only constant in life is change, but it's nice to look back.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Absolutely.
Jonathan, thank you for taking time with me, my friend. I appreciate it.
Always glad to visit with you, Jeff.
All right.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure. Jonathan Reed has been our guest here. The book again, Lost Resorts of the Iowa Great Lakes, available where Jonathan told you it is, and it's a great read. And if you appreciate Okoboji, you're going to get a big smile on your face. So we thank Jonathan for being here with us today. We thank you, as always, for joining us right here on Okoboji Broadcast. Okoboji Broadcast with Jeff Thee is brought to you in part by the headquarters of the University of Okoboji is at the Three Sons, open Monday through Saturday 10 to 5 and Sunday noon to 4. Last Touch Painting and Cleaning, providing interior, exterior, and house painting and professional cleaning services in Spirit Lake. Okoboji Mattress Company, 1 mile west of the junction of Highway 9 and 71 in Spirit Lake. Bank Midwest, dream big, plan wisely, live well. And Ducky's Marine and Motorsports Repair in Spirit Lake. Lakes Regional Healthcare and Avera Partner. Brand's Law Office in Spirit Lake. Ruthven Locker, where carnivores are welcome on Hill Avenue in Spirit Lake. Beck Engineering in Spirit Lake. Be Radiant Laser Skin Studio, newly located in the Okoboji Plaza in Okoboji. And by Quest Wealth Management, a financial advisory practice of Ameriprise Financial Services. Advisors Jan Spielman, AJ Spielman, and Erica Wachholz.